Thank you, Tiffany. Wow, that was such a mouthful we sent over to you. I'm sorry about that. That was way too much information about me.
Our pleasure. I'll let you take it from here.
Thanks. And I do have some Fraser Valley credentials. I went to West Langley Elementary when I was younger, so I do. I've got a little bit of being there besides just working on this project. So I'm just going to share my screen real quick because this is what we want to see. So I was on the team. Just make sure you guys can see that. All right, perfect. I was on the team for the Fraser Valley Alliance Technology Sector Capacity and Investment Attraction Strategy, and it was kind of interesting when I was watching Andrew's last session. A lot of the things that he mentioned, in terms of understanding a market and picking where you want to spend your time and energy and developing your product and constantly retesting. I mean, these are all very, very important aspects of investment attraction, particularly when you're doing it for a community. So I'll sort of show you how we built our strategy and how it all came together. So essentially, I was just going to run through our project, go over the technology sector, the engagement we did, the markets we picked, our strategic recommendations, and then our critical path. So essentially, the way the project rolled out is we had our standard project initiation. We did a bunch of review and analysis working on data. We did a lot of stakeholder engagement, so interviews and focus groups sort of to understand the tech sector. We dove into the investment readiness of each of the communities that are part of the Fraser Valley Alliance, and then we developed our reporting and presenting. So one of the things that we had to sort of start with was that the Fraser Valley Alliance as an organization didn't necessarily have a definition of the technology sector as it currently existed. So we had to take a look at a few different definitions. So if we take a look at BC Stats, they use a term they call the high technology sector, and the newest and most advanced state of technological development, product or output based, and it was also based on commodity lists. So it's things that are actually leaving, things that are actually being developed. So it doesn't necessarily encapsulate all the different types of businesses we were looking at, and BC Stats had sort of the most up-to-date and best information related to those products. But it didn't tell the whole story, and it didn't tell the whole story when it came to the communities in the Fraser Valley Alliance, because there's lots of different sectors that weren't necessarily represented within that list. So what we did is we recharacterized them, and we used I don't know if everyone here is familiar with NAICS codes, the North American Industry Classification codes, but that's how basically businesses are broken down from 2-digit all the way down to 6-digit NAICS, and that's how we identify specific industries, and that's how data is collected through Stats Canada. So what we needed to do to really understand what was in the region was get together a list of the specific sub-industries within the technology sector and what our technology sector definition was going to be. So we focused in on advanced manufacturing, agri-technology, aerospace, ICT, and clean tech. That was partly through conversations with the members of the FEA, but also with diving into the specific codes of what was actually within the region. And so when we went through the NAICS list, we picked out those businesses and workforce clusters that are within the FEA. So it's something called location quotient analysis. It's kind of boring, but basically it's the concentrations of the specific types of business and workforce in a particular area compared to the province and to each other. And it allows us to really understand, which industries currently have a presence, which industries don't, and then sort of pull together those areas of strength. So where that sort of value proposition starts to be. And then once we sort of understand what specific industries are there, we started looking at technologies that enabled those sectors. So we could take a look at, okay, so if we have lots and lots of businesses that do a particular thing or make a particular product, what are the products and services that they purchase in the technology sector that really make sense, and to really start focusing on those. Then we did some work on our stakeholder engagement. We did, as I mentioned before, community input workshops, FBA member interviews, and stakeholder interviews. And this was really to sort of get an idea of who the movers and shakers were on the ground and sort of understand what's going on beyond data. Because as I'm sure many of you know, investing is not always it's not always by the numbers game. Sometimes there's a lot of really personal reasons why people have chosen specific communities and why they stay in specific communities. I'm based out of Winnipeg, and there's many companies here that are only here because their great grandparents started the company. So understanding why businesses have chosen a particular location is fairly important too, because it does become a very personal choice. We took a look at some different FDI markets. So one of the things we sort of dove into, we looked at, what the residential labor force was for each of the highest sectors that we saw on each level. So on this particular slide, it's advanced manufacturing, aerospace, and agribusiness. So you can see the resident labor force, training resources, proximity to inputs. These are all just sort of basic investment readiness scores that site selectors look at when they're trying to pick different locations. So we were able to assign, rankings just within the FBA communities to understand, okay, where was the highest level of strength within each of those sub industries. And then we went through an investment readiness score out of 100. So, for all the different communities that were within the project, we sort of looked at what those rates were, and we could see that for some of these industries and some of these areas, there were out of 100, some of these scores weren't particularly robust. So, the city of Abbotsford scoring the highest when it came to agribusiness. So when we sort of took a deeper look at what those sectors would be and how they sort of interplayed with one another at that higher level, we realized we have to go a little bit deeper to find the specific sub-industries that really made sense. Sorry, I'm going a little fast. So when we picked out the priority sectors, so we had a number of criteria to identify, which are the ones that we want to spend our time on. So you can see, are the sectors a match for the region's growth objectives? Do they fit with the existing businesses and resources that are currently there? What are the long-term prospects for that opportunity to contribute to the economy? Alignment with provincial and regional incentives and initiatives, the degree to which the opportunity will be supported by local and regional champions, and the depth of competition for investment readiness. So you can see in a number of these, agribusiness scored very high across the board because I think a lot of us are seeing agribusiness as a real growth sector, real opportunity sector within just within Canada, particularly with increasing levels of export opportunities, the rise of protein processing to develop new types of plant-based meat products or protein products that they're being plant-based. So there's a lot of growth in that space and a lot of technology being used. Aerospace was another example. There's a fairly substantial aerospace cluster within the region. One of the issues with aerospace in particular, though, is that it's a very collaborative industry. There's a lot of depth that goes into bidding on specific contracts for aerospace, and there's lots of different connections that have to happen within the supply chain for it to be successful. It's one of those harder industries to just pitch and say, hey, you should set up shop here in this community. You need to have a lot of background information and dive really deep into those specific areas to really understand it. So within these subsectors here, we have aerospace, metal manufacturing, plastics and chemicals, and wood product manufacturing. So those were some of the ones that came to the top when we were looking at what are the sectors that we really want to dive into for the actual strategy itself. Then we looked a little bit at priority markets. So what are the markets we're going to be paying most attention to when it comes to FDI? And so, if we take a look at, what are the top sources of FDI into Canada? So the United States pops up at number one. They're the largest recipient of our exports. They're the largest recipient of BC's exports, BC's and Canada. And their sector-specific import rank is, again, number one. So those were specifically related to those sectors. And that was the sector-specific import rank was kind of interesting because we dove into the supply chains for those sectors and we saw which country of origin were those products and services coming from, particularly within the technology subsectors. So we were able to identify, okay, so if these are where their suppliers are from, they're a good possibility to reach out to potentially become investors to support their products locally, to be able to support their businesses. There's a reason for them to consider moving to the area, and that's sort of why we include that region in there. With China, Japan, and the United Kingdom sort of filling out that top four. So when we dove into our strategic recommendations, there's a few different things. And this again, heading back to what Andrew was saying, we really saw the FBA as needing to establish a framework for FDI. So really needing to come together and figure out how we're going to approach these things. So We suggest developing a well-supported investment attraction program centered on the identified sectors and investment-ready sites. Establish ongoing support for business retention and expansion to enhance FDI programming, and that's part of that testing that Andrew was talking about too. So the idea being that by having a solid business retention and expansion plan, working closely with your local businesses within these sectors, you really understand what their pain points are within the industry, and then understand, what are the things we can do to improve the environment for those types of businesses. Also, businesses tend to cluster together. So understanding, are these the specific businesses within these technology subsectors that we really want to attract? We need to talk to them, understand why are they here? What are the things that keep them here? What are the things that they need? And use that to help develop our value proposition when we go out for FDI. Action 3 was developing and maintaining a comprehensive database of businesses in key sectors. So we helped develop that as well as part of this process. So when we pulled data from all of the different community levels at the 4 and 6 digit NAICS level, we could see exactly which businesses were in the communities that we were working with, and where those sort of clusters sort of existed. And then we were able, through other databases, to start putting some names to those businesses, so understand which businesses were within those locations. And as part of the process, we identified a list of businesses that we thought each community should reach out to within those specific subsectors. And then Action 4 was establishing aftercare protocol. So the idea with aftercare is, once someone's made an investment within the community, it's important for that not to be the last touch point within a community. It's to reach out, make sure they understand where they can get support, where if they run into specific issues, who can they reach out to, who's the right person. All those things are just important. And when you're working together in a broader region, you need to sort of figure out how you're going to interact with one another, how those things come together, because there's a lot of unglamorous, keeping track, keeping tabs, updating databases, and providing information that has to go into any successful FDI framework. So Pillar 2 was all about improving overall investment readiness. So Action 1 was, the investment database development and maintenance. So taking a lot of the data that we gathered up to this point and making sure it's stored centrally by the FDA, that every member has access to it, and that it's continually updated. So we know what's going on the ground within our communities, and we're also adjusting our approach based on what we're hearing back from the businesses we're talking to. Action 2 is establishing lead handling protocols. So when leads come in from different sources, who takes the lead? Where do they go? How do they go through that process? And leads can come in a number of different forms. So it's just understanding, who deals with what. Because the one thing you want to avoid is having, all the different members of the FDA reaching out to the same person at the same time, asking the same questions. That's the whole idea of working together and working together as a region, is that you can have one place to get those answers and a process to lead through that. Action 3 was refine the FBA's value proposition in targeted sectors. So when we identified the specific sectors that had already clustered within the region, and by cluster, concentrations of businesses, concentrations of workforce within those specific sectors, there was a reason that those businesses are within are where they are right now. So diving into why they're where they are and how to expand on that, and what the value proposition they see in the region, that's the important information we need to keep pulling up and continue to refine, continue to reach out, make sure that message is more and more targeted and focused on what the potential investors are looking for. The next step was developing the community partnerships that support FDI and export related activity. Just keep everyone working together. And also working with different industry groups. I mean, this is a great example. The tech forum, making sure that different community groups and partners are working together. We're having the same conversations. We're figuring out how we're going to work together to support FDI. And then, when it comes to export related activities, how do we get our local businesses exporting more? Because it creates more opportunities. Action 5, undertaking an industrial land strategy. So there's a couple of industrial land strategies sort of currently on the go right now. There's one completed by the Metro Vancouver region, and then another one that's currently underway within the Fraser Valley. But the idea with the industrial land strategy is to understand specifically what sites do we have available that meet the needs of those businesses. And then once we understand what we've got and what's currently available, it really helps us narrow down what our targets are going to be. So, for example, if you try to attract a massive data center, but you don't have the power infrastructure, you're not going to be very successful in doing that. So making sure you understand what those sectors require and what your value proposition is and what you can provide in terms of specific sites is really important. And the last one was undertaking a workforce development strategy. So really understanding, within the key sectors that we identify as the ones we want to attract, who do they need in terms of workforce? What specific skill sets do they require? And what's the pipeline currently look like? Do we need to increase specific actions towards immigration to fill those gaps? Can we develop programming at the local universities? How do we put that together? So those are some of the things that would fall under a workforce development strategy. Pillar 3 was the implement proactive FDI efforts. So once we've established the platform, once we've established that we're investment ready, Pillar 3 is all about proactively going after FDI. So developing an FDI marketing platform, developing collateral, so taking those value propositions we talked about, developing pitch decks, getting sector sheets ready to go, getting those materials in front of those decision makers in different companies that might go for this. Developing a certified site program. So essentially what that is part of that earlier stage I was talking about is getting those sites identified, but also understanding what those sites require in terms of being investment ready, and then certifying them within the communities themselves. So if a site needs to have X amount of power, it needs to have X amount of water, X amount of what have you, space to be able to handle a particular facility, we can, as an FBA, certify that site as having all those things in place. And that allows us to identify those particular sites that are sort of our top priority. The last one was developing a lead generation pipeline on Action 4. And the whole idea with that is making sure you're working with community partners, working with businesses, working with the Trade Commissioner Service, working with site selectors, sort of understanding what those relationships are and how to get leads into the community. So understanding which businesses are currently looking for a new location, because it's a very small window often in the business's life cycle that they're ready and willing to make a new investment, to set up in a new country, to make that extra step. And businesses, they don't have those moments very often. So it's about understanding who is getting ready to make that decision, who is thinking about doing that, and really narrowing those leads down and making sure you have all the information in place so you're ready to really pounce on them when you have that opportunity. Because typically, it can take a long time for a business to be ready to make an investment, but as soon as they are, you have to have that information ready immediately, or they'll keep looking to another location. So it's all about having all these things together and making sure you're ready for when the time is right for FDI. So we also identified some top 5 actions. So some of the things, there's a lot of actions in that other slide, but these are sort of things that we thought should maybe get started in the next 12 to 18 months. The industrial land strategy being one of the first, identifying what those lands are. The investment attraction program, the ongoing support for business retention and expansion, developing and maintaining a comprehensive database of businesses, and refine the FBA's value proposition in targeted sectors. So these are all very important things. And the good news is a lot of them are not necessarily big ticket items. They're not very expensive things to do. A lot of them can be desktop related or can be done with existing resources within the communities. There's not the need to invest a lot of additional funding by just having information and working together and establishing how we're going to process things. And that's always important. We want to make sure that when we're working with communities and we have a strategy in place, it's not all just, well, you need to spend a lot of money at this stage to get to the next stage, because a lot of it is just about being prepared, having the right information, and then understanding what your targets are and how you want to go after them. And that's the end of my presentation. Just at 20 minutes, and we have 10 minutes for questions. Sorry, I know I went really fast.
Not a problem. Thank you so much for joining us today. It was an absolute pleasure hearing from you. Did we have any questions coming through here? All right. We'll pass on some questions to you when they come through, because I'm sure people are going to have lots of questions for you. But thank you so much for joining us today, Jordan.
Well, thanks for having me.
Our pleasure. All right.
Oh, there's a question.
Oh, there's a question. All right, we'll quickly ask one of these questions. So we had a question from the audience. When you are next to a big tech hub like Vancouver, how do you convey your message?
It's definitely tough because there's huge concentrations of companies workforce, of universities that are putting out excellent talent. But there's lots of different ways to approach it, right? So one of the benefits you could say is, well, we are right next to a giant tech hub. We do have access to that workforce. We have access to those companies. We have access to that whole ecosystem. But you can do it at a lower cost, closer to your inputs. So, if, for example, in the agribusiness side of things, you want to be closer to your inputs if you're doing specific types of processing, or if you're a company that makes software for processing machinery, you kind of want to be closer to those businesses in their actual locations. So in the FBA communities, you can really make a case for that. I mean, and I don't think I need to tell you guys, the cost of living in Vancouver downtown itself is fairly expensive. So being able to set up shop further out, to be able to offer your employees a different type of lifestyle is a fairly important thing too. And that's become a huge piece when it comes to FDI. We're all hunting for workforce. We're all trying to find the specific people with those specific skill sets, and really understanding what they want is really important. And that's where we sort of talk about refining value propositions. We really want to be focusing on those specific companies that would be interested in locating maybe near a major hub as opposed to within the actual hub itself.
Perfect. Great answer. And we have another one here. How much does the availability of skilled talent who may be attracted to the big tech hub impact the decision of startups and companies when it comes to choosing a location?
Right. Well, it's a huge factor. I mean, having access to talent is a major aspect of all the different decisions when major tech businesses are making their investment choices and where to expand. I mean, you see it through probably everyone saw the big Amazon HQ2 piece that went out I think it was about a couple of years ago now, where they were trying to find a new location and hire 50,000 tech workers. And really, when it comes down to it, there's only a couple places in the world where you have access to that many tech workers. And they picked one of those locations, not because it was the most inexpensive or had other access to other specific things. It was because they had access to the workforce. And I mean, to be a little bit more crass, they have access to the political class within Washington. So that was part of the reason why they chose their specific location. But I think the difference too with startups. I mean, startups tend to cluster around existing businesses where they currently living. When people working at large businesses, or those businesses shut down or change, or they decide to step out on their own. But I think all of us know, the big thing that draws a lot of startups to Silicon Valley is access to the investors. So that ends up being a bigger impact than anything else, is having access to that funding.
Mm-hmm. Fascinating. And also, what trends do you see due to COVID where people are working more remote and can work from anywhere?
It's actually really cool. I saw an article just this morning, and it was a perfect term that was coined. It was called, the old boom towns. Now we're calling them Zoom towns. Basically, they're gateway cities near large natural forests, so national parks. They're big gateway cities outside of major cities, and they're having issues maintaining their infrastructure with the number of new people moving in to work remotely. Because if you're trying to get out of the city, and I have colleagues in Toronto who, they're stuck in their small Toronto condo, and they can't go anywhere because of COVID. So they've been, staying at other places, moving out, and we were starting to see a bit of a trend of this, the working remote. But I think everyone just sort of saw a huge acceleration in the ability to work remotely. Just businesses being open to the idea to begin with. I mean, we've had the technology for years, but this is the first time we've really all, been forced to do it. So there have been communities and economic development strategies, across North America that have all been trying to attract those remote workers. Sometimes you call them lone eagles, those individuals who can work from anywhere. And they're fairly important parts of a lot of those strategies. And it's all, again, similar to the earlier question, it's about that lifestyle proposition. What are we offering those particular workers within these communities? Are we able to get them the things that they want while also being able to work where they want? So definitely COVID's pushed that. It'll be interesting to see what happens as things continue. There's been a lot of announcements and work. CEOs have been interviewed, and a lot of the CEOs really hate remote working. You know, they've done different interviews and they say, nope, I don't want it. I don't like it. I want to be in the office. And then other CEOs have completely embraced it. They're going 100% remote. I think it was Google canceled another 1 million square foot of office space that they were going to set up because in favor of remote, because now they don't need it. And I think that's going to be a big push. That'll be the big issue in downtowns. Those very expensive office towers. A lot of them, I think, are going to stay empty.
Oh, very interesting. That's a very, very good point. Zoom channels, I really like that. All right. So I think we're out of time for questions right now. But thank you again so much for joining us, Jordan. It was fantastic hearing from you.
Thanks a lot. Have a great day, everybody.
You as well.